Okay.
So, thank you for coming. It's this old house talk for the 12th of August, and it's presented by the Whatcom County Library System and the Point Roberts Historical Society. And I'm Chris. Today we're going to talk about the Johnson House, a house you can barely see because there's a huge hedge in front of it. When you go to the garbage dump, you've all gone to the dump, there's a house just opposite the road that goes to the dump. That was an addition to the house that the Johnsons lived in. And then there's a little road, kind of a narrow access road right beside it, and that leads north to the homestead where they grew up, I believe. I'm looking at Bunny because she knows everything.
No. Oh, it's already told her that. I decline that.
So, the name of the Johnson Road is attributed to the Johnson families. And one of the Johnson daughters married a man named Johnson, so, you know, it was sort of mutually, this has to be the Johnson Road. And it used to go from the Boundary Bay Road up the Mill Road to where Benson Road is. That was all called the Johnson Road because that was the only road that went like that. So this is one of the pioneers, one of the daughters that came, and she remembered, her name was Sarah, and she came in covered wagon. She remembered that, coming in covered wagon from North Dakota. And it said in here that she was born in Mountain, North Dakota on September 27th, 1896, and came to Seattle via Minnesota in 1900. In 1901, Sarah, along with her parents, Thorleifur Johnson and Jacobina Johnson, who was born in Iceland, moved to the Icelandic community on the Point. Her parents homesteaded 160 acres adjacent to the Canadian border. The produce from the farm sustained them. They sold and shipped produce to Bellingham via boat from the pier at the present site of the breakers. Well, now there's no more breakers, but there is the reef, so, you know. Sarah walked to school on the Canadian side of the border near the Beach Grove Golf Course for a short time, and that's where a lot of Point Roberts kids went to school at one time. Then schooling came to the point where she attended at a site near the Grange Hall. Do y'all know where the Grange Hall is? Just down this road.
Is that the original place of it?
No, it was nearby. I think
Okay.
it was on Freeman's Beach.
Okay.
Roads were not quite what they are today, and she had to cut across country via the trails that existed in those early days. The Point at that time was busy with fishing caught by traps. Several canneries flourished here, and following the turn of the century, there was one on the west side, the George and Barker, and the Alaska Packers on the east side of the Point. Sarah worked at both canneries while a young girl, accompanied by her mother. Fishermen lived in tents, residents cut trees, raised their own vegetables, and were generally self-sustaining. Wild blackberries were picked and sold by the bucket for a few cents to the tent dwellers. And my dad, who was a kid at the time, he had a special patron down there on Boundary Bay, and she always looked for him, and he always sold her his blackberries to her. 5 cents a bucket.
Oh.
I know. Many residents walked to Ladner for groceries and carried them back. My father also told me that, and I said,
Ladner.
how could they walk 7 miles to Ladner and back? Well, they did. And so some of them had a horse or a horse and buggy, and they could use that. Before the coming of horses to the Point, a steer was used by Sarah Johnson's father to plow the land. She was married in 1916 to Ellis Johnson, whom she met that winter. He was from Blaine and worked for John Hanson, hauling shingle bolts. So John Hanson is a name you might hear again and again, because he owned a business in Blaine and employed a lot of people that were going back and forth from Point Roberts to Blaine.
By boat, Chris?
I imagine.
Wow.
Or walking.
Yes.
My dad once walked from Blaine to Point Roberts. Actually, he did that twice. Yeah. All right. They lived at her parents' home, and a daughter, Pearl, was born there. Then they moved to Swanee Swanson's house for a year, which is east of Tyee Drive and north of Benson Road. So, east of Tyee Drive and north of Benson Road. Do you know where Swanee Swanson lived, Bunny?
I don't.
Shame on you. You're
Yeah.
supposed to know these things. So around there.
Tell me again, Tyee and...
East of Tyee Drive and north of Benson Road. And now, those were in the days before houses had house numbers.
Was that the house at the bottom of the hill? That was Swanson's house?
That could have been.
Where the
Where Alonzo-
co-op nursery is now.
Yeah, where Alonzo lived.
Yes.
Maybe that was it. Okay. And their son Jack was born. They moved to Benson Place, the site of the Gulf Mobile Homes, which would have been just across the road, and Mel Johnson was born there. And there was a little old house there. It was occupied by a Magnuson, but not my relation. And we called it the Splits House because at one point in time my father was asked to move it, and it split as he moved it. But it's still on Point Roberts. It's at the end of Anderson Street. Then tragedy struck. The home on Benson burned to the ground. They were able to save a few precious items with the help of the neighbors, and her husband went to threshing for Henry Julius in August of that year and rebuilt a 2-room house at about the same spot. So Henry Julius lived in South Beach. You know where the Lighthouse Park is, the very first house after Lighthouse Park, coming east again, that's the Julius homestead. And
Oh, that red white one?
yeah,
Okay.
that's his granddaughter who lives there.
Oh, can I
now.
talk to her? Okay.
Yeah, her granddaughter, right?
Oh.
Carol Weiner and
Yeah,
Gary, yeah. And also Carl Julius, his grandmother too, yeah. In 1927, in 1927 was when that was. And it went on to say that she had step-grandchildren, 5 grandchildren, and that her husband had passed away in 1960. And she kept active crocheting. And if you ever went to her home, she would have a crocheted blanket like this on her sofa, and she would be making another one.
Wow.
And it was a pattern she loved. It's called the ripple stitch. And I've always liked it myself, so years
Is this
later.
ripple stitch?
Yes,
Okay.
it's called ripple stitch because it looks like a ripple. And I like it because it's very orderly, and you don't have to be joining things together. It's just one piece. So this is pictures of, she was a good friend of our family, and this is pictures of Sarah Johnson when she was visiting sometimes at our home. That's her with my little girl. This is another picture of her, and I can pass that around. This is one day, I think, when she was visiting. That's myself and Auntie Sarah, and that's Drew Meikle and Auntie Sarah, and my mother and Auntie Sarah. And my mother was always saying things to old Auntie Sarah, who was one of her first friends. "Come on, Sarah, let's go to Bellingham today." And Auntie Sarah would say, "Oh, honey, my hair doesn't look right." And, we'd just look at her like, yeah. But as I got older, I realized just how important that was. say, I feel like Auntie Sarah. My hair is just not right. Of her family that grew up on Point Roberts, this is a brother. I can pass these around. This is a brother, Geesley Johnson, and he fought in World War I.
The next picture.
That's okay.
This is another brother, John Johnson, and he lived in the old family homestead for quite some time. And this is another brother, Balder,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
and somebody else on a fish boat, it looks like. And she had a sister, Sylvia. And Sylvia lived on Point Roberts most of her life too. She married a fellow, I think, from the south, whose name was Al Ortel. And he had a voice like a bass drum. It echoed everywhere. And he made sure you heard it. He often repaired the roads, and he also dug the graves. And he lived, when you come down Tyee Drive, there's, let's see, I think that 150 Tyee Drive is where the Loreens live, and right next to it is an empty area, but you can see there's an old driveway there. That's where Johnny and Al Ortel lived.
Oh,
Yeah. And so this is another photograph of them as the sisters and brothers. And this is her sister, John. They called her Johnny. Her name is Sylvia. And Auntie Sarah was always careful to wear. She loved to get dressed up when her hair looked good. She'd had her perm. And she loved to wear brooches and big flashy earrings.
Oh, geez.
Otherwise than that, she was a very conservative lady. And so this is one of hers, I believe.
Oh.
And I still wear it sometimes.
Aw.
Yeah. Their house was just a very small house with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen. And when you walked into the house, you kind of smell the mildew. And then the kitchen floor had a definite list. It was going like this. Like that. The people who bought the house, and one of the big things was there was no bathroom there. And when I was a little girl, we didn't have one either, so we had an outhouse. And I don't know what it is with kids, but they always want to use someone else's bathroom as soon as they go visiting, right? Just checking it out. They had a great big pot under the bed with a lid, and a very high bed for it to go under. And that's what a lot of people had. They had that. And a big deal for them was when the house had a bathroom added to it. And Auntie Sarah was quite proud of that bathroom because she could have a bath and running water in there. And
And what year do you think that was?
that was probably the late 50s that she finally got, or late early 60s that she finally got her bathroom.
Sure.
Oh.
Uncle Ellis, we called everybody auntie and uncle in those days, whether we were related to them or not. He raised rabbits in the back, and he'd take the children out there to look at the baby rabbits. He was pretty deaf, except when you were talking, something you didn't want him to hear. And then his voice would pipe up from the living room, "That's not so!" Oh. You're supposed to be deaf as a post. You always are. And he had troubles with his car. And I suppose that most of the people in Point Roberts had given him a push at one time or another. And he'd come up and he'd say to my mom, Sis, I just need a little push to get home." And it would turn into a push all the way home. With a short stop just before the corner, because he had there stashed in the ditch a 6-pack of cold beer. His wife, Sarah, would not allow him to drink in the house, so he had this little secret stashes. He had secret stashes here and in there. And then he'd finally get home. And he was, I remember my they were always kind to us. My sister and brother knew them. Auntie Sarah always made us cookies. And when my son was young, she always made cookies for him too. And rolls, bread rolls. They were quite heavy, but you know, she made them with love. And then Uncle Ellis had a red nose. And my sister, the first time she really registered that, you know, who this was, she was standing there looking at him, and she couldn't take her eyes off of this nose of his. But they were very kind people, and they were the only ones that ever invited our entire family over to eat, including our messy children. So it was very, very nice. And I can't remember when she passed away, but she left a mark on our family for sure. She lived to be able to sell her home and go and live in Blaine at a, not assisted living, just at a home they had there for, apartment there that they had for seniors. And she was often accompanied by her neighbor, Myrtle Allen. Now, if you go up Benson Road, and you go past South Beach Road, almost the next place over is has a grand entrance to it right now, and it's called Drew Hedge.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that used to be Auntie Myrtle Allen's home, and she and Lloyd Allen lived there. It was a lot of acreage, and until she was, I think, in her late 70s, Auntie Myrtle would mow that lawn. It was her duty. Her husband was a very sweet man who raised pheasants and passed out lemon drops. And just a kind of soul. So together, Auntie Sarah and Auntie Myrtle would walk up and down the road. They'd walk, there was a shortcut from between the two houses that went through the old garbage dump road. And they'd walk each other home. And then Auntie Myrtle was mortally afraid that there would be somebody out there ready to attack her. So she always made Auntie Sarah walk her home. But it was a special thing growing up with them in our lives. Yes. And that's the people who bought the house were the Beersons, I think. The name escapes me. They lived there for quite some time, and they built on the big part of that house that you see now, and they kept the little old part. Yeah. I'm not sure who owns it now, but you can always take a look. The one thing that remains there that belonged to Auntie Sarah is a rose called the fairy rose, and it's got tiny pink blossoms, and if you drive past, you'll see that it has escaped through the hedge and is growing up and over it. And it's still blooming. So there you go. That's it.
I have a little memory of Sarah.
Okay.
She and Gertrude Anderson, and they must have been women in their middle 50s by that time, worked at the cannery, the Iverson Brothers Cannery.
I remember
packing
that.
salmon by hand and clams by hand.
I remember going down to see her at at that cannery.
Those of us who had attained 14 or 15 could get part-time jobs there.
My
in the
grandma
summertime.
even worked there one summer.
And we used to work across the table from Sarah and Gertrude because they would keep an eye on us and try to see that we didn't get something unedible into the cans. They were very good. But imagine them, the two of them putting in those long shifts.
Gertrude Anderson, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
They were good friends.
Oh yes, Gertrude Anderson.
Thinking when you said bathroom, Sarah may have earned the money for that bathroom by working in that cannery.
She might have. She
About the
might
right
have.
time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was Gertrude the same as Audrey?
No, she would be Audrey's sister-in-law.
Audrey's sister-in-law. Okay. All right. Audrey Anderson. The Andersons were an old family that lived at the corner of Gulf Road and Marine Drive, across from where the Saltwater Cafe is. There was a house there that burned down probably about 15 years, 20 years ago. Yeah. And so I did bring some other pictures just to show, because somebody might recognize or remember. This is a picture of 4 very grim-looking women, but when you look closely, you see that they were dressed up. And grim was the expression you used when you got your picture taken. And they are Mrs. Solomon, it would be Bunny's grandmother, Mrs. Myrdal, Mrs. Benson of Benson Road fame, and Mrs. Burns, who lived in the home where Bunny and her family live now. There's that around, and this is a bigger one. And Mrs. Burns' name was really Rosa Bjornsson, but they changed the name to Burns, as so many things happen, right? And Mrs. Benson was Mrs. Christian Benson.
They had witness protection.
And Mrs. Solomon was Gudrun Anderson Solomon. And Mrs. Myrdal was Anna Myrdal, and she was Mrs. John Myrdal Sr.
Any idea when that picture was taken, Chris?
No, but it's been around, right? And then, you know, people get to know, newcomers come. This is a picture of Mr. Bill Calder. And the Calders came and had a home here too, and it was their summer home. And they married into the Largo family, which is another old family.
Okay, I know the streets.
Yeah. One of the streets is Largo. And this fellow was a member of the Vancouver Parks Board.
Chair.
Yeah, and the chair, all right. And he and my mom were quite fond of one another. One day his car drove up and Mom rushed out on the back porch to give him a big hug. And the man stepped back and said, "Thank you, but I'm not Bill." Never was seen again. That's him admiring my mom's garden. And so is this. Then, here's a classic picture of some old timers. I think Matthew Goodmanson and Carl Julius, and I think the guy on the end was a man named Gunther, who is probably still around here, but the other two have passed. Goodmanson had a house here once, and Matthew and his brother taught school in Blaine, in Bellingham. This is a picture of a typical church wedding at Point Roberts. As soon as the bridal party came, the wedding was done, the bridal party would come down and they'd take pictures as they came down the stairs. I think that's Chris Manning's wedding, but I'm not sure. And if it is, that's her mother dressed in Icelandic outfit at one of our fairs. And Jules, remember a couple of Saturdays ago we talked about the Samuelson house? Mm-hmm. Well, I've got some pictures here of Jules Samuelson. And there's a picture here of my dad sitting at the table with Jules and his daughter, his granddaughter, Dana. She's known now as, she was one of the older daughters of Ernie and Lola Lorraine. And Jules was Lola's dad.
Yeah, we see. Those are fun. Yes. Yes.
And this one is a pretty good picture of Jules and my dad and my dad's brother, his oldest brother, who was a dentist in Seattle, Sid Magnuson.
The rich guy on the end.
He came up once and did dentistry out on the front porch there.
Oh, my.
For free, I think. And I was fooling around outside once and I found a tiny gold nugget that I think I still have, but must have been part of the filling that he would have used. Mine now. Then the other day we talked about the old librarians from
Yes.
Fort Roberts. And so this was mother to one of the old librarians. A very sweet lady, Agda's mother, and her sister, her other daughter, Randy. And then going down Benson Road from my mom's house, which is right at the intersection of South Beach and Benson Road, there's a little old farmhouse where they now sell produce.
Yes.
Okay, do you know where that is? So they sell produce there, but before that, it belonged to an English couple that farmed it and gave us strawberries, and just a jolly, jolly father and daughter. Before that, it belonged to Alonzo. And Alonzo and Laura, I think, were from Kentucky or Louisiana. And they actually had a horse and buggy that they used. And I don't think they ever had a car till maybe not even when they were old. But they lived in that house, and he would come to visit often. He brought me, when I was born, he saved up all these beer bottles that he'd collected on the side of the road and brought them to me, and this was, we kept them in the barn. And he brought me my first cat, Turpentine. He was a very kind man. His wife seemed kind as well, but she had two dogs, small Pekingese dogs, and she kept them in the house all the time, and the house just reeked. So any visits to see her were like, oh,
Short.
I gotta go. And even my father, who was very generous in his ways, if they needed wood, he'd go and bring them in wood. He said, okay, I'm just going to go in fast, bring in the wood, dump it, come out. So, those are the stories of those. These are just old pictures of, I think, Magnusons, but I'm not sure who they all are. I know this is a picture of my dad and his mom when he was about 5. I think these were sisters to my grandmother, and they're in very old Icelandic dress. That's their costume. This could also well be family, and she has the typical Icelandic headdress on. And I'm going to leave it to Bunny to figure out who these people are, if she knows. Sometimes you know, sometimes you don't. The Icelanders in Gimli and Winnipeg, they made up a calendar once of people who were Icelandic, but nobody knew who they were, just to pass it out around and see if anybody could identify their grandpa or grandma from that. So, any questions?
I have a question, not about anything you showed her. Up until the last few years, there was an elderly gentleman that used to ride his bike. Like, he was really elderly. I just wondered if you knew who he was. I haven't seen him recently.
I don't know.
Like, he'd ride it far.
Wow.
Do you remember Robert, that guy? He come down APA, and I see him all over going, Roberts. Like, he was, I bet you, at least in his 90s, looking at him.
Did he ride one of those bikes that you lean back?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was the inventor of a particular model of automobile, Chris. Doctor, he was a UBC prof, I think.
Oh.
And he had his building where the storage area is now on Chai. And he was building his car there.
Did you see those?
I can't remember now
I can't remember.
the point of the car, but it was something to do with saving gasoline.
I can't remember.
It had to do with what? It
Okay, it was a...
had to do with what?
Pardon?
The car had to do with what?
Oh, I think taking a battery, an engine out of a car and replacing it with another one. And they were battery, not,
Oh, was it the Riddick?
yes.
Yes.
That's what, the Riddick car. Yeah,
I think so.
that's, I remember reading about that, yeah. I think that's was his last name.
Okay.
Would he
Makes
have been really
sense.
elderly?
Yes, he was in his late 80s, I think.
Oh yeah, but boy, they're gonna get pill a bike.
But he had a house overlooking Boundary Bay on top of the hill and would ride down to his establishment.
Okay, Alpha Wonder because I saw him a lot. Wow.
Thanks for the name, it completely escaped me.
The only car I remember seeing anything about out here was the Riddick car. It was for environmental. It's like they're trying to do an environmental type car that was. It wasn't a gas engine. That I think he was doing electric, wasn't
Yes,
he?
I think
Yeah,
that
it was
was
an
the
electric
idea.
vehicle that he was working on.
Okay, so you come and sit over here.
Maybe we could just leave these out and everybody could come and look
Sure,
at them.
sure. That's all I have to say about it for the time being. And I'm not sure what we'll talk about next time.
Oh, you've always found a house.
Well, I tell ya, I'm sitting there on Sunday morning thinking, what? Tuesday morning, what? Thursday?
Thank you, Chris.
So last night I finally figured out. Okay.
Thank you.